Look, nobody, and I mean nobody, expected the humans to show up. The Kalroth-Vendazi war had been raging for approximately 317 standard cycles, which sounds impressive until you realize that both species had the attention span of caffeinated rodents and the tactical sophistication of particularly aggressive furniture. They'd been locked in what historians would later describe as the galaxy's longest, stupidest slap fight over territorial rights to the Meridian Cluster, a collection of 17 star systems that neither species actually needed, but both refused to lose on principle. The Galactic Council had tried everything. Mediation? Failed. Sanctions? Ignored. Strongly worded letters? You'd have better luck threatening a supernova with poor Yelp reviews. The war had settled into a comfortable routine of mutual destruction, both sides bombing each other's colonies, stealing each other's ships, and generally making life miserable for everyone in a 12-sector radius while the rest of the galaxy watched with the resigned exhaustion of parents whose children were fighting over a toy neither actually wanted to play with. Then humanity showed up. Now, you have to understand, humans were new. Like, embarrassingly new. They'd achieved faster-than-light travel approximately 40 cycles ago and had spent most of that time being aggressively enthusiastic about everything. Meeting the Velnari? Fantastic. Discovering the Korthian trade routes? Wonderful. Learning that the galaxy had been embroiled in a pointless war for 3 centuries? Well, that seems inefficient. Have you tried just talking? The Galactic Council had politely suggested that humanity focus on getting their bearings and understanding galactic politics before offering input on complex situations. This was diplomatic speak for shut up and let the adults handle this, which the humans cheerfully ignored because reading between the lines required acknowledging the lines existed in the first place. Captain David Park of the UEN's diplomatic incident, a name that should have been the first warning sign, had been assigned to observe peace talks between the Kalroth and Vendazi. These talks had been scheduled 14 times and cancelled 13 times, which was actually progress since the previous year's talks had been cancelled 17 out of 17 times. Captain Park was there as part of humanity's Galactic Integration Program, which meant he got to sit in uncomfortable chairs, drink terrible beverages, and watch 2 species scream at each other while everyone pretended this counted as diplomacy. The 14th set of talks lasted approximately 9 minutes. "You destroyed our mining colony on Zerthia 7, Ambassador Grelthak roared, his forearms gesticulating wildly. The Kalroth were large, crystalline beings who communicated through a combination of subsonic rumbles and interpretive dance that made every disagreement look like an aggressive rave. "Your colony was in our territory," High Commander Vix hissed back. The Vendazi resembled bipedal lizards who'd been dipped in mercury and given a crash course in passive aggression. "The Treaty of Karshan clearly states, the Treaty of Karshan was voided when you attacked our research station. That was after you bombed our settlement. That was retaliation for—" Captain Park raised his hand. "Quick question. What exactly is in the Meridian Cluster that's worth 300 years of war?" Both ambassadors turned to stare at him with the withering contempt reserved for small children who've interrupted important adult conversations by asking why the sky is blue. "The principal," Ambassador Grelthak rumbled. "Strategic resources," High Commander Vix added. "Right. But what resources specifically?" There was a pause. "Various valuable resources," Grelthak said carefully. "Of strategic importance," Vix emphasized. Captain Park pulled up his datapad and scrolled through the Meridian Cluster survey reports. According to the Galactic Registry, the cluster contains 17 marginally habitable planets with limited mineral deposits, no unique elements, and atmospheric conditions ranging from unpleasant to actively hostile. The entire cluster has an estimated resource value of approximately 14,000 standard credits. He looked up. "You've been fighting a 300-year war over real estate worth less than a decent shuttle. It's the principle," both ambassadors said simultaneously, then glared at each other for agreeing. "Gentlemen," Counselor Thrix interjected smoothly. The counselor was a Zafrani, a species that resembled floating jellyfish and had perfected the art of diplomatic condescension. "The human observer is still learning the complexities of galactic politics, the strategic importance of the Meridian Cluster, extends far beyond simple resource calculations. Does it, though? Captain Park asked. Because it seems like you're both spending approximately 9 billion credits annually on a war over territory worth 14,000. That's not strategy. That's a hobby for rich people with self-destructive tendencies. The meeting deteriorated rapidly after that. What the Galactic Council didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Captain David Park had not been assigned to observe peace talks because of his diplomatic skills. He'd been assigned because he was humanity's foremost expert on what Earth military doctrine referred to as asymmetric conflict resolution, which was a polite way of saying he specialized in ending fights by changing the rules so dramatically that both sides forgot what they were fighting about. He'd also been assigned because his commanding officer had gotten tired of him suggesting creative solutions to Earth's military exercises and decided the galaxy deserved a chance to experience humanity's particular brand of chaos. Captain Park returned to the diplomatic incident and called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. "All right," he said, pulling up a holographic display of the Meridian cluster. "Here's the situation. 2 species have been fighting over worthless territory for 3 centuries. They refuse to negotiate, and the Galactic Council is too polite to tell them they're idiots. We're going to end this war." Lieutenant Commander Okoye, his first officer, raised an eyebrow. "Sir, we're observers. Our mandate explicitly states that we're here to observe and report, yes, and I plan to give Earth a very detailed report about how we observed the war, observed a solution, and observed ourselves implementing it." "That's not how observe works," Lieutenant Yuki muttered. "It is now. Commander Chen, how fast can you manufacture 5,000 emergency beacon drones?" Commander Reina Chen, chief engineer, looked up from her datapad. "Define manufacture. Take components we have. Assemble them into something that broadcasts a distress signal and looks vaguely official. 2 hours if you don't care about quality control." "I actively encourage the absence of quality control. Lieutenant Yuki, I need you to hack into the Kalroth and Vendazi military communication networks." "Sir, that's technically espionage, yes, but in our defense, their encryption is held together by the digital equivalent of duct tape and wishful thinking. If they didn't want people reading their messages, they should have used better passwords than password 123. Lieutenant Yuki grinned. "Give me 30 minutes. "Excellent. Commander Okoye, start drafting an official-looking document. Make it dense, bureaucratic, and completely incomprehensible. I want at least 40 pages of legal jargon that sounds important, but says absolutely nothing." "You're going to need to be more specific, sir. That describes approximately 90% of military paperwork." "Perfect. Use that as your template." The plan, such as it was, relied on 3 fundamental principles of human psychology that apparently translated well across species. First, people will believe almost anything if it comes from a source that sounds official. Second, everybody hates paperwork more than they hate their enemies. And third, given the choice between looking stupid and doubling down on a mistake, most beings will choose to double down until the heat death of the universe. Captain Park intended to exploit all 3. Phase 1 began at 0600 hours Galactic Standard Time when 5,000 emergency beacon drones suddenly appeared throughout the Meridian cluster, each broadcasting the same message. "Attention! This sector has been designated a Galactic Heritage Site under Treaty 4827B of the United Systems Convention. All military operations must cease immediately pending environmental and archaeological surveys. Violations will result in fines not less than 50 million credits per incident. Have a pleasant day." The Treaty 4827B of the United Systems Convention did not exist. The United Systems Convention itself did not exist. The entire thing was approximately as legitimate as a 3-credit bill, but it sounded official, and that was what mattered. Within 20 minutes, both Kalroth and Vendazi military commands were frantically contacting the Galactic Council, demanding to know what was happening. The Galactic Council, who knew exactly as much as everyone else, which is to say, nothing, responded with the bureaucratic equivalent of "please hold," and began investigating. Phase 2 kicked off while everyone was still confused about Phase 1. Lieutenant Yuki's carefully crafted malware infiltrated both military networks and began doing something unprecedented in the history of galactic warfare. It made both sides' targeting computers agree on something. Specifically, it made every Kalroth ship identify every other Kalroth ship as friendly, and every Vendazi ship identify every other Vendazi ship as friendly. This sounds simple until you realize that both militaries had spent 300 years with computer systems that were so paranoid they occasionally flagged their own vessels as hostile targets. Suddenly, for the first time in living memory, both fleets experienced what it was like to operate without constantly worrying about friendly fire. It was disturbingly peaceful. "This feels wrong," Commander Brock of the Kalroth warship Infinite Vengeance muttered, watching his tactical display show nothing but green friendly indicators. "Agreed," his tactical officer rumbled. "It's too quiet. Should we fire on something? On what? Everything's showing friendly." They sat in uncomfortable silence, uncertain how to process a combat situation that didn't involve panicking about whether they were about to be destroyed by their own side. Phase 3 was the masterpiece. Commander Chen had spent 2 hours building what she affectionately called the bureaucracy bomb, a massive data packet that contained Commander Okoye's 40-page incomprehensible legal document, along with approximately 12,000 pages of supporting documentation, reference materials, addendums, codicils, and footnotes that she generated by feeding random legal texts into a predictive algorithm and telling it to maximize confusion. This digital monstrosity was then transmitted directly to the personal communication devices of every military officer, government official, and civilian administrator in both the Kalroth and Vendazi empires, along with a friendly note. "Please review and complete the attached compliance forms regarding heritage site designation. Failure to complete forms within 72 hours will result in automatic fines. Forms must be completed in triplicate." The galaxy had never seen bureaucratic warfare on this scale. Within an hour, both governments were drowning in paperwork. Officers who'd spent decades planning military operations were suddenly struggling with questions like, "Describe in detail the historical significance of your current position, minimum 500 words, and list all actions taken in Sector 7G for the past fiscal cycle with corresponding environmental impact assessments." The Vendazi High Command called an emergency session to address the paperwork crisis. The Kalroth Strategic Council did the same. Neither side was fighting anymore. They were too busy trying to figure out what a heritage site compliance certificate was, and why they needed 17 of them. The Galactic Council, meanwhile, was experiencing its own crisis, as both empires demanded to know why they hadn't been informed about Treaty 4027B. "Because it doesn't exist," Counselor Thrix finally admitted after 3 hours of increasingly frantic research. "Then who?" Everyone turned to look at the human delegation. Captain Park was drinking coffee with the serene expression of someone who'd started a controlled burn and was now watching it spread exactly as planned. "Captain Park," Counselor Thrix said with dangerous calm, "would you happen to know anything about the current situation? I would know everything about it, actually. We solved your war." "You what?" "Solved your war. Stopped it. Ended it. Pick your favorite verb." He pulled up his datapad. "As of approximately 4 hours ago, both the Kalroth and Vendazi militaries have ceased all combat operations, withdrawn to defensive positions, and are currently engaged in filling out compliance paperwork. I estimate we've reduced active hostilities by 99.8%. "You can't just—" Counselor Thrix's translation device made a sound like a kettle whistling. "There are protocols. Procedures. Your observers. We observed that your peace talks weren't working. We observed that both sides were wasting resources on a pointless conflict. We observed a solution and implemented it. I'm observing right now that you seem upset, which I observed you might be, which is why I prepared this." He handed the counselor a data crystal. "What is this?" "The treaty. Already written, already approved by my government, ready for signatures. It grants the Meridian Cluster to the Galactic Council as a neutral territory under joint management by both the Kalroth and Vendazi empires, with Earth serving as a mediating third party. Both sides get equal representation, neither side loses face, and everyone can pretend this was the plan all along." "This is insane. This is efficient. The alternative is 3 more centuries of war, or we can sign this, both sides go home, And everyone gets to pretend they made a strategic decision instead of admitting they spent 300 years fighting over a cluster worth less than a used shuttle. Councillor Thrix's tendrils quivered with what might have been rage, or might have been grudging respect. And if they refuse? Captain Park smiled. Then we release the second phase of paperwork. I'm told it includes a mandatory historical documentation project requiring every military engagement to be catalogued with supporting evidence and witness testimony. Should take approximately 60 years to complete. You're blackmailing them with bureaucracy. I prefer to think of it as offering a compelling alternative to continued administrative burden. It took 6 hours of heated debate, but ultimately, both the Kalroth and Vendazi governments agreed to the treaty. Partially because the terms were actually quite fair, partially because they were exhausted from paperwork, but mostly because the alternative was admitting to their citizens that they'd been fighting a 300-year war over real estate worth 14,000 credits. Pride is a powerful motivator, but self-preservation is stronger. The signing ceremony was held on the diplomatic incident, which seemed appropriate given that the entire resolution had been one continuous diplomatic incident from start to finish. Ambassador Grelthak affixed his crystalline seal to the treaty, with what might have been relief. I suppose we should express gratitude for your intervention, Captain Park. No gratitude necessary, just doing our job. Captain Park paused. Out of curiosity, what were you going to do if we hadn't intervened? Continue the war, obviously, High Commander Vix said. What else would we do? Right. Of course. Silly question. The treaty was officially ratified at 11:47 hours Galactic Standard Time, exactly 5 hours and 47 minutes after Captain Park had initiated his plan. By the standards of galactic diplomacy, this was approximately equivalent to resolving a 300-year conflict in the time it took to watch a decent movie trilogy. The Galactic Council was simultaneously impressed and horrified. You realize, Councillor Thrix said privately to Captain Park after the ceremony, that you've set a concerning precedent. Other species will expect similar rapid resolutions to their conflicts. Good, Captain Park said. Maybe they'll stop wasting time on stupid wars over worthless territory. You don't understand galactic politics. I understand that 300 years of war is ridiculous, that both sides were too proud to admit they'd made a mistake, and that sometimes you need an outside perspective to point out that everyone's being an idiot. He finished his coffee. Besides, we didn't really end the war. We just gave both sides an excuse to stop fighting without admitting they wanted to stop. And the bureaucracy bomb will mysteriously disappear in about a week once we're confident they won't restart hostilities. The heritage site designation will be quietly retired. The forms will vanish from their systems, and everyone will pretend this was all perfectly normal and planned from the beginning. You're remarkably comfortable with deception for a species that claims to value honesty, Captain Park shrugged. We prefer to think of it as tactical truth management. Besides, nobody got hurt, the war's over, and both sides got a face-saving solution. That's not deception. That's diplomacy. Councillor Thrix made that kettle whistle sound again. Your species is going to be either the best or worst thing to happen to galactic politics. Why not both? The aftermath of what became known as the 5-hour resolution rippled across the galaxy with the subtlety of a supernova at a library. Earth was simultaneously praised for its innovative diplomacy and censured for its flagrant disregard for established protocols. The Human Diplomatic Corps, in a statement that would become legendary, responded, "We didn't disregard the protocols. We observed them, determined they were ineffective, and improvised. That's not disregard. That's adaptation." The Galactic Council created a new position specifically for humanity. Alternative Resolution Specialists, which was diplomatic speak for chaotic problem solvers we can deploy when everything else has failed and we're desperate enough to try something insane. Captain Park was promoted to Admiral and given command of a new division tasked with creative peacekeeping operations, which meant he got to travel the galaxy pointing out when people were being stupid and making them stop. The Kalroth and Vendazi, for their part, discovered something unexpected. Without the war to define their relationship, they actually had to talk to each other. The joint management of the Meridian cluster, still worthless, still barely habitable, became a strange sort of project that required cooperation, compromise, and communication. Within a cycle, They'd established the galaxy's most dysfunctional, but surprisingly effective partnership, united by their shared experience of being bureaucratically defeated by upstart humans. I still don't understand how they did it, Commander Brock admitted over drinks with his Vendazi counterpart, Captain Civ, at a bar on the newly established Meridian station. They cheated, Civ said. Obviously, but how? They didn't play by the rules. What rules? Exactly. They drank in contemplative silence. Think we would have ever stopped on our own? Brock asked. Honestly, probably not. We were too invested. 300 years is a long time to admit you were wrong. The humans just didn't care about that. They didn't have 300 years of history telling them they should care, Civ gestured with his glass. They looked at the situation with fresh eyes and saw it for what it was. Stupid. We're never living this down. Oh, absolutely not. Our descendants will be telling stories about how humanity ended the Great War with fake paperwork and aggressive bureaucracy. Could be worse. How? They could have used actual weapons. They both shuddered at the thought. Humans were terrifyingly competent when they were trying to be non-lethal. Nobody wanted to find out what they could do when they actually meant business. Back on Earth, Captain, now Admiral, Park was giving a debriefing to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who were listening with expressions ranging from admiration to concern to, "I'm not sure whether to promote this man or lock him in a box." So, let me get this straight, Admiral Morrison said slowly. You ended a 300-year war with fake legal documents, computer malware that made both sides stop shooting each other, and weaponized paperwork. That's an accurate summary, yes, sir. And at no point did you think to ask permission? I was given broad discretion as an observer, sir. I observed, I acted. The war ended. Permission seemed like it would slow down the process. Admiral Park, it was captain when I started, sir. You've created a diplomatic incident of unprecedented scale. With respect, sir, I solved a diplomatic incident of unprecedented scale. The Kalroth Vendazi war was costing the galaxy billions of credits annually, threatening shipping lanes and generally making everyone miserable. Now it's over. That seems like a net positive. General Kowalski, head of strategic operations, leaned forward. The Galactic Council wants to hire us for more alternative resolution operations. See? They're thrilled. They use the word hire with approximately 17 layers of diplomatic hedging that translate to, please do this again, but also please stop doing this. Mixed messages are just a form of indirect encouragement. That's not... General Kowalski pinched the bridge of her nose. You've essentially turned humanity into the galaxy's chaos agents. Chaos engineers, Admiral Park corrected. There's a difference. Chaos agents just cause problems. Chaos engineers cause problems that solve bigger problems. That's not a real distinction. It is now. I put it in my report. There was a long silence. You're going to do this again, aren't you? Admiral Morrison said. Sir, the galaxy is full of stupid conflicts over meaningless territory, hurt pride, and communication failures. Someone needs to point out when the Emperor has no clothes. Admiral Park smiled. Might as well be us. God help us all, General Kowalski muttered. Ma'am, with respect, God gave us the ability to solve problems creatively. It would be rude not to use it. 3 months later, Admiral Park received his next assignment, the Threxy-Morphian border dispute, a conflict that had been simmering for 80 cycles over mining rights to an asteroid belt. He arrived at the negotiation station, reviewed the briefing materials, and immediately called his chief engineer. Commander Chen, how many fake geological surveys can you produce in the next 2 hours? Depends. How fake are we talking? Fake enough to convince both sides the asteroid belt is actually a protected breeding ground for endangered space crystals. Sir, space crystals aren't... They are if we say they are and make the documentation convincing enough. There was a pause. I love working for you, sir. It's like being employed by chaos itself. Chaos engineering, Commander. There's a difference. If you say so, sir. The Threxy-Morphian border dispute was resolved in 4 hours. A new record. Both sides agreed to joint stewardship of the protected breeding grounds and established a research station to study the unique crystal formation process. The space crystals didn't exist. But the research station became a surprisingly successful joint venture in asteroid mining, once both sides realized they'd been tricked, but were too embarrassed to admit it. Humanity's reputation as galactic problem solvers grew. So did their reputation as magnificent bastards who couldn't be trusted to follow rules, but could be trusted to get results. The Galactic Council's official position was that humanity's methods were unorthodox, questionable, and effective enough that we're not going to stop them. Unofficially, most council members kept Admiral Park's contact information readily available for when traditional diplomacy failed, and they needed someone willing to break every rule in service of actually solving the problem. "You realize," Lieutenant Commander Okoye said to Admiral Park as they traveled to their 5th assignment, "that we've essentially become the galaxy's fixers. Is that a problem?" "No, sir. Just an observation." "Good, because the Velthani Crix situation is next, and I'm told they've been fighting over water rights for 200 cycles. What's the plan?" Admiral Park smiled. "I'm thinking fake drought warnings, emergency resource redistribution protocols, and a mandatory water conservation task force that both sides have to join. Bureaucracy bomb? The biggest one yet. Outstanding, sir. The galaxy would never be the same. Wars that had dragged on for centuries were being resolved in hours through a combination of creative thinking, aggressive paperwork, and the kind of brazen confidence that only comes from a species young enough to not know what they're not supposed to do. Humanity didn't solve problems the way the galaxy expected. They solved problems the way that actually worked. And if that meant occasionally weaponizing bureaucracy, deploying fake legal frameworks, or convincing warring species that they'd been fighting over endangered space crystals, well, results were results. The humans had entered the war, and they'd ended it in 5 hours, not with weapons, but with something far more dangerous: creativity, audacity, and a complete disregard for the idea that "we've always done it this way" was a valid reason to keep doing something stupid. The galaxy would never look at paperwork the same way again. The end.